Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the system that we're looking at is my mixed red worm population living inside of the VermiBag tote. But the VermiBag tote no longer lives inside of one of my bus boxes. I relocated it, I removed it from the bus box, and I've put it into the custom made frame that I made for it when I first got the system. I guess the main reason was that while resting within this tub, it just seemed like way too much moisture was developing within the tub beneath the bag, and I kept finding worms going in there to hang out in the moisture. I don't know if they went after the moisture or they were looking to get out of the bag or whatever the case may be. I also started sensing maybe a little bit of excess dampness and moisture, like that smell of mustiness. And it seemed to me like, if we're really going to want to see this system get ready for the worms to be migrated out of it, the material in the bag's got to dry a little bit. So I think this is the best solution. But I guess before we can really return the bin to my inventory of available containers, I guess we could relocate the sticker indicating to us what's happening in this bin and how old it is and who lives in it. So that officially takes this bus box out of the picture, and the VermiBag tote now lives in its frame. Now, when we last checked in here 8 days ago, when we initiated foraging, we were still a little bit non-committal about whether or not we were really transitioning from what I refer to as just the regular composting phase of the system into a period of no more new composting, just composting the existing stuff that's already present in the system with that fairly descriptive and accurate name, I think, of foraging. So even though last time we were talking about that last feeding, the 21st feeding the system had ever received as, maybe being the system's last feeding, I think we pretty much have committed to that at this point. So I'm definitely tracking this as a system that's now foraging. I have no intentions of adding any more food, I don't think. So the only real reason I thought that I might at some point in the future still add more food, it would be to accomplish the same thing that happened here over the last two feedings. The last two feedings were a dry approach to feeding. So a lot of times worm bins are fed all kinds of juicy fruits and vegetables, kitchen scraps of all different sorts, all having good amounts of moisture content. But in here, for the last couple feedings, we wanted to start steering things towards a little bit of drying. So the last two feedings were nothing more than cardboard and worm chow. So my worm chow is dry. It's just a pulverized combination of seeds or grains or nuts or beans or whatever it is that I might have laying around, stuff that I've decided has been here for long enough that it might be time to just put some good use to it rather than having it waste space in the cupboard. And what we did last time we were in here, well, let me talk about 2 times ago. 2 times ago, we laid out some cardboard and covered it in some writing with the worm chow. And then we came back, and every place there had been worm chow, all the cardboard had been eaten up, so we tried to, flip that piece of cardboard over, but it was in multiple pieces, so there was really no keeping it as a single sheet of cardboard anymore. Nevertheless, we combined it all into a single point in the middle, and then once again, besides the little bit of worm chow that was still sort of stuck to the cardboard, we went ahead and we added even more. And I gotta tell you, that last little sprinkling of worm chow onto all that cardboard, I came back in here 3 days later and it was all gone. It was reduced to what you see here, I believe, just these last little scraps where I suppose the worm chow was all depleted already, and then the worms just went about their business. So it pretty much took care of almost all the cardboard in those couple of worm chow feedings. So it is kind of cool how you can almost sort of steer the worm activity to certain materials, because they really do seem to like the worm chow. Or maybe it is just a combination of the worm chow plus the, available bedding being right there. So this is really all there is in here as far as I could tell. I mean, there's probably a good bit of it still mixed in underneath the surface. So, you know, to go into one more feeding just to try to motivate worms to eat into this stuff here, it almost seems like if we were to just bury it, the stuff would get, you know, probably eaten. I don't know, do we just sneak one more feeding into here? Maybe along the way of our exploration of the bin, maybe we collect up some stuff and then we go ahead and just sprinkle a little bit more on here and then we'll officially start foraging. I could easily talk myself into something like that. So now one thing we've kind of theorized on in terms of what's living in here, every time we peel aside some material, and I think it's got a lot to do with excess moisture in here, lots of little things moving around. First we thought they were mites, and then I think we pretty much determined that they were springtails. But I'd really like to get a close-up look at these little guys. So before let's set up for a close-up. I'll dig right into here. Just from the size of my fingers, you can see how zoomed in we are. So I'm going to carefully try to move some of these castings aside so we can get a closer look at what's living down in here. Try not to tip over the camera in the process. Look at those little wormies dive. Seems like the springtails do also kind of want to get out of the limelight, so they don't just let themselves sit out there in the light either. They burrow away pretty quickly too. Let's do one more quick excavate here if we can, just so we can get one more last look. It's hard to say whether or not we've reduced their numbers in general. I think drying will result in fewer springtails in the system, but for now we're still pretty damp, so to see lots of springtails is not too unusual. So I'm liking the idea of collecting up these bits of leftover bedding we found. Doesn't matter if there's some castings mixed in with them too. I just like the idea of maybe giving the system a little bit more dry food with which we can try to promote the breakdown of these little bits of bedding scraps that we found along the way. And it also seemed like if it's, you know, not going to become too much of a headache to do so, we might be able to also pick up some other scraps along the way. And I think just the aeration of the system will also help us get towards a batch of much more dry and manageable material. Hopefully material with fewer springtails. Quite a number of them in here. Just weird, a system that you would not expect to be as damp as it is probably one of my most damp bins. Alright, so now I guess there is a good amount of moisture in here, but maybe from your point of view it might look like this stuff is extremely dry just from the way it all crumbles apart and none of it appears to want to clump together. It's a little bit deceiving. The stuff is really nice and it is kind of neat the way it all separates from itself. But I think it still could stand for a little bit more drying. It's only been 8 days of foraging, but as far as what foraging is meant to accomplish, which is giving the worms a chance to break down the residual junk that might still be floating around within the system, I don't think that there's going to be a whole lot that they would need to tackle, especially if we end up taking the majority of that stuff and we apply one last grand finale feeding to see what we could do about driving some worm traffic all over this stuff and possibly resulting in it being all gobbled up. Just interesting, when you're down to really fine finished castings at this point, it's very easy to pick out these little plum pits and stuff. Stuff that you know is not going to break down in your worm bin, at least not in the typical time frame one of my bins runs for down here in my wormery. And I have been trying to extend the time period. So the fact that we're in 20 plus feedings here with the system is a testament to that. I've often in the past treated 15 feedings as, you know, not so much like a limit or anything, but as an average number of feedings that the system would get before I would want to try to think about moving the worms over into a fresh environment, harvesting their castings. But it has seemed to me like it is possible to just keep going a little bit longer, add a few more feedings, and not have to bring the system to a close so soon. And I'm still within what I consider to be my primary constraint, which is just, you know, the capacity of my systems. Some of my larger bus boxes, like that one that this system was resting in prior to us moving it over here into the frame, those I think are 7-gallon capacity. The slightly smaller ones might be just a little bit less than that. And this bag, I don't really know what its capacity is, but I don't think it's quite up there. So these worms did kind of freak out the last time I was in here. So, you know, not only did I just move the bag over into the frame, ooh, another plum pit. So easy to find them. Yeah, these worms were just crawling all over the walls of this system. So I'm kind of glad that we've got them in this bag, that I can just zip the top shut and not worry about coming back here a few hours later and finding worms all over the floor. So I will be zipping this thing shut after we're finished here. Because if they react anything like they did last time I was in here to move the bag and aerate things, they're going to do the same thing today too. They're going to be cruising the walls, trying to jump out. So this is kind of cool. I like this idea of collecting up all those things that are going to end up in the long run just being stuff you might want to try screening out of the finished castings. But if we can get the worms to break it down further, I'm all for that idea. So what do you think? This plus some worm chow ends up being their last meal, maybe? Maybe we could just keep it in that maybe mode to say, hey, if we come up with another good excuse for putting more worm chow in here and making it a 23rd feeding, then we'll do it when the time comes. But for now, I think we will be counting today's check-in as not just a check-in, an aeration, but we'll go ahead and we'll count it as a feeding. We'll put worm chow again, just like we did last time, sprinkled on whatever scraps of leftover stuff we can locate and pile up. And there is a good bit of it floating around. And I'm sure we'll be able to keep finding more of it. I've often thought of, you know, kind of pre-processing some finished castings, or very close to being finished castings like these, to get this stuff all out of it using a screen. Do it pretty quickly, enabling you to really start your foraging with stuff that's only small enough to fit through the screen. And then all this stuff would maybe be used as food or, you know, something else, but wouldn't be sort of contaminating the finished castings anymore. And that's what we're going to do with this, sort of. All right. This material is just so nice, I can't seem to resist fiddling with it, but I also keep spotting more and more little pieces of shredded paper and cardboard and whatever, even a piece of shell or some sort of food item I think I spotted earlier. At this point, anything I find that's not castings, I could see us sprinkling with worm chow to try to drive worm traffic at it. And I've just got this funny feeling we're not going to see any of this stuff next time we check in here. So for anybody that's been really following this system very closely and would have liked to have seen the relocation of the bag out of the bin over into this frame or anything like that, or if, you know, you would have liked to have participated in that, I apologize. It was just sort of one of those knee-jerk reactions. When I smelled the mustiness, I came down here. I didn't like what I was sensing. I did actually end up pulling a good number of worms out of the bin from underneath the bag. I don't know why there were so many down there. We had, during a recent check-in, even emptied out down there and pulled all the worms out and put them back up in the bag, but they were all down there again, and there was even more of them that time. So none of that got captured on video, unfortunately. But I think we're kind of back in the point where we're hopefully going to be able to stabilize things here. Let things dry, reduce the number of springtails, set the stage for a nice migration, get the worms to just move out of this stuff voluntarily once we get it to the point where there's really hardly anything for them to nibble on in this stuff. So all this removal of stuff also ends up in the long run, I think, translating into motivation for the worms to find a place where there's food. Because I'm taking all their food and, well, I'm going to refeed it, give it back to them, but hopefully in such a way that's going to cause all of it to just get gobbled up 1, 2, 3 and be gone, and we'll be done with it. Alright, so I think in future check-ins we'll probably do something similar, although I don't know if we'll be able to find enough of this stuff to talk ourselves into adding another feeding of worm chow, but who knows? Maybe we will, maybe we won't. So let's get things done here. I think before we cover up and zip up, we'll just add this pile of bedding back down into the middle. Very similar to the way we left it last time, piling up a stack of cardboard, covering it in bedding, covering it in worm chow, and then coming back only days later. I think it was 3 days later when I peeked in here, and almost all of it had already been eaten. It was amazing. And that's kind of what I'm after here again. So I'm going to stop picking. I think we're in a good spot here. Why don't we stack up? You know what, before we do that though, I'm going to come in here just for a quick sort of preventative step here. I've been applying BTI to all my systems, and I think this may have been the last system where flying insects were still a problem, and I think it may have just been because of the excess moisture that was, you know, in and around the system. So now that we've really gotten all that under control at this point, for the most part, I've got a feeling flying insects might be a thing of the past down here. Hopefully. Keeping my fingers crossed, but things do seem like they're adding up to be that way soon. Alright, let's see what we collected here. It does resemble the pile that we left them with last time, as far as the amount of scraps of cardboard that we collected. No, I would say we definitely had more last time. And since they did away with it so nicely, or maybe this is really just the scraps of that at this point, I think one more feeding of worm chow will be the trick. And I don't want to pile this stuff up, you know, so it ends up being in a mound, but I do want to apply it pretty generously. And it's not much of a feeding, I got to admit, but hopefully it's enough to motivate them to come in and come check out these leftovers. These little scraps of leftover, mostly bedding, a few little bits of this and that. And hopefully the majority of it will be eaten by the next time we come in here. Alright, very cool. Well, definitely an interesting system. And it is kind of nice that I'm able to zip this thing shut. Mainly because of the way I saw them responding to my last very vigorous agitation of their environment. So this time we'll just play it safe, keep them covered, and it'll be curious to see what happens to this stuff here. So that's feeding number 22 on day 218 with this mixed bag of worms. And for now, I guess unofficially maybe we're starting foraging, but let's leave it open-ended like we did last time. Hopefully you'll agree. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Bye now.